Hi everyone, welcome to Tech Down Over. Here we are again. This is, we have a good show today. And joining me is my good friend and co-host, Jeff Blanchard. He is from the Down Under side of things, and I'm up over here in the LA area. How you doing today, Jeff?
Good, thank you, Rick. Good afternoon. Yes, and it's always good to have a guest, and it still always amazes me how there's somebody like our guest we have on that I didn't know about until just recently. And I
didn't know about Dustin.
Where have I been living?
Yeah, no, Dustin's been around for quite a while, and he does some great podcasts. Well, actually, let's run our intro and we'll introduce him. And we're back. And, Dustin? Sorry, I've got a big light on me. I can't see too well from where I'm at today. I changed locations for the day. Joining us today is Reverend Dustin Abbott. If you're familiar with camera reviews and what Dustin does, he does some of the best reviews in the industry. I really think so. And we've been looking forward to having him on for a while. I think we almost got you on about a year ago, but one of the persons trying to get you on just couldn't quite make it happen, I think. And Sarah got you on. We're very happy to have you here and to talk about you a little bit and the things you do and how you got into photography and stuff. And so welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Great to be here.
Now you're Ottawa, Canada. A lot of people, I've heard people think that you were from Arizona, and I guess you lived in Arizona.
That's correct.
But people have said that you were from Arizona that I've known. And we thought you were in Arizona originally. In fact, you were on a trip, I think, to Arizona one of the times that we were watching one of the podcasts you did. But you've been involved with cameras for a long time. That's one of your professions.
That's correct.
What do you specialize in? Do you do a lot of portrait stuff or landscape?
I do a little bit of everything, just, kind of for the love of photography. I do portraits periodically. I'll do weddings periodically, but I'm fortunate because of the nature of what I do that I can kind of do it when I feel like it and for whom I want to do it for. And so it's a part of the scope of what I do. I've done product photography. I've done a little bit of, travel photography, landscape photography, even some commercial work for, different businesses, hotels, etc. So I've been fortunate to get to dabble with a lot of different aspects of photography.
Yeah, that's great. Now, you've been a Canon shooter for a long time.
That's correct. And actually, my first DSLR was a Canon. And actually, as far as my first DSLR, I probably only actually purchased, it was a Canon T1i. Mm-hmm. And so that would have been 7 or 8 years ago. And so, really, for the nature of what I do now, I'm a relative newcomer to kind of the, more serious end of photography. So let's just call me a fast learner.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, if you really look at it, digital hasn't been all that popular until really about 9 years ago, where it really just took off.
Mm-hmm.
It's been pretty interesting. Were you shooting before when you had just the SLRs?
I have done some over the years. When I really kind of began to pick up, and I actually got a position. The interesting thing is that this kind of originated from within the religious organization that I'm a part of, and that I was elected to a position of being a media director for the province. And at the time, in our family, my wife was the photographer. And I use those air quotes appropriately because it seems like now when I hand her a camera, I wonder how we ever got family pictures before.
She better not be watching, right? Oh, that's funny.
But anyway, the nature of what I needed to do, I needed to get more serious about it, and it turned out to be kind of an untapped talent there that began kind of more as a hobby, and then doors opened up, and I was able to pursue it professionally in a number of ways within a few years.
Yeah, that's great. And you know what? If you practice with it, it's not that hard a hobby to make a really good profession with. It's kind of interesting. The cameras have gotten so nice that it's easy to shoot with them, and that's the part I love. You don't have to. I remember my dad; he always had SLRs, and it took him forever to take one shot. It's like, come on, Danny, take the shot. And
Yeah.
No, got to get my turn. It took a long time. And mind you, the same settings, but it just seems faster now. It just seems nicer. And you see everything you're taking, the way it's going to come out. And that makes a big difference. Now,
For sure.
recently, I've been watching your podcast, and you've been getting into a little bit of the Sony world, too, which is...
That's correct. Yeah.
And I think you're getting into it about the same time we are. I was a Canon shooter for a long time, did a little bit of Nikon. And I was always bashing Sony. I was going to ask Sony. I didn't like the size. I'm fairly large, and my hands are big, and I'm like, can't. It just felt teeny. And then we got the first Sony A9 last December and some lenses, and I went, wow, I like this. And the lenses are beautiful. You've probably shot with some of the Sony lenses already. They're really nice lenses. I don't think Canon has the stranglehold on lenses anymore either. They have very good lenses too, and I've got a lot of those. But the Sony world is different.
Yes.
It just takes a little getting used to. The quality of the imagery is nice. Even the color science is almost, I think, there. Not as good as Canon.
The last two have really, well, and probably starting with the A9, but the A7R Mark III, and then I've actually, in the last couple of days, I've started reviewing the A7 III.
Oh, you haven't?
And it also is very nice. So
okay.
I'm kind of comparing it with the A7R Mark III since I did purchase one of those. And yeah, I think for me, the biggest reason that I think my biggest criticism of Sony until most recently, and it's not to say that they have necessarily improved this, it's just they have such compelling products right now that I'm kind of willing to overlook it. And that is that Sony seems to, unlike Canon's a very stable company. I mean, they innovate, but they innovate at a fairly slow pace.
Right.
But what they're really good at is supporting their product.
Yes.
And it seemed like Sony was so eager to deliver its next camera that it gave very little support to what it did, in some cases only 7 or 8, 9 months ago.
Right.
And they were already moving on. And I think in some cases they were, maybe rubbing some people the wrong way with that felt like after Sony got their money, they didn't really care. Sony just wanted to sell them something else.
Yeah. And support, I heard, was really bad too. If your camera broke or had a problem, you dropped it, whatever, not the best support, not the best engineering to help you out fixing things. That's what I've heard from people who've had accidents, and it's like, so we're trying to be very careful with that. I've only dropped a camera once in my life, and it sheared off a lens, and I was like, oh. And it was an accident. I didn't really drop it. My bag dropped it. I just happened to be slinging the bag, not realizing it was open. It was bad. It was last year, and I lost. It was a Panasonic GH5, and one of the lenses just sheared off. It was like, ooh. However, it did teach me how cheaply made those lenses are. It was amazing. Little piece of fish wire holding it onto the mount. That was it.
Wow.
That was it. $1,000 lens. I was going, oh man, these are cheap. But you're right. Canon in the old days, they never ever broke, and even if you dropped them, actually, the 5DSR just got dropped by Harold in an accident the other day, and I think he dented the floor. The camera's fine. It was not one bit of damage. No, the lens, a 50mm lens, perfect, and the camera, nothing. So they're built well.
I was going to say, Rick, with the Sony, I think they must have improved their service somewhat, because, as you said, there was quite some chatter going on that people just couldn't. It was the higher end people couldn't get any service from them, but that sort of died down. So I think they must have seen the light a little bit and improved their service, because, as well, I suppose they've come from the market where going into consumer electronics where things don't go out too much. Then these cameras are getting into cameras, and they're just designed to get damaged out there, really, because when you take them out, if you're going to use a camera, you do take it into places that get a bit dangerous.
That's right.
And also, with you reviewing some of the lenses for the Sony, have you heard about the Sigma range, or is there anything more about them that will be fitting natively to the Sony?
Yes, I've been talking to some contacts within Sigma, and it was interesting. When I kind of presented, it was WPPI conference where they announced the new FE mount of a lot of the Art Series lenses, and so they were announcing something like 9, if I remember correctly, 9 lenses that would be coming in FE mount And I was surprised that when I began to talk about that, I also mentioned one Tamron lens, which is about to, I'm about to have my hands on it here shortly, but it's a 28 to 75 millimeter f2.8 lens. And, you know, in the midst of all these other lenses, I thought that people would react more to the Sigma lenses than what they did to that one Tamron. But I think where a lot of people are questioning is that these Sigma lenses, you know, I kind of look at it as a mixed bag. From Sigma's perspective, I think it's great because they're able to utilize their existing optics, repackage them with a focus system that maybe is a little more attuned to, you know, a mirrorless system, which I don't know if they're going to an actual stepping motor or if they're just kind of, you know, tweaking the algorithms to where it focuses better with a mirrorless system. But the biggest problem, I think, the downside to that is that you're ending up with lenses that are, in fact, they're not only not smaller than the Canon or Nikon mount counterparts, they're actually a little bit longer and a little bit heavier because they essentially have a built-in adapter. And so already Sigma lenses tend to be right up near the top of their class in terms of weight and size. And so, of course, when you move to a smaller mirrorless system, that becomes even more of a liability, you know. So I'm just wrapping up my review of the Sigma 14 to 24 millimeter f2.8 art lens, and I think, if I remember correctly, that lens is 1,050 grams. So if I put that on my, you know, my 5D Mark IV from Canon, you know, it's a little bit front heavy, so but it balances reasonably well.
That's over a kilo. That's about 2.5 pounds. That's a heavy lens. Yeah.
So you throw that onto a mirrorless body where the body weighs, you know, a couple hundred grams less, and all of a sudden you've got an even more front-heavy combination.
You're back to a DSLR.
That's where I
almost.
wonder whether Sigma will lose some people. I mean, there's some people who are going to look at it and say, you know what, I don't care about that. I just care about the optics. Right. And I think that my experience has been, even with the MC11 adapter and Sigma lenses, that I actually get the best focus accuracy out of that combination that I've ever gotten out of Sigma art lenses on their native systems.
Interesting.
But I think the trade-off for that is you're going to have lenses that are pretty big and bulky and heavy on Sony.
Well, you know what's interesting also is that the Tamron and the Sigma lenses for Sony are not that cheap. They're almost getting up to Sony prices. And I was going, like the Tamron, I think 25 to, what is it, 20, is it 25 to 78? Or?
It's 28 to 75.
28 to 75. Slightly different from a 24 to 70 everybody's used to, but I looked, it's like $1,300 now. That's the price I saw for that Tamron. I was going, wow, that's pretty.
No, it was just announced today. And I knew this already, and so I can mention it now because it has been announced to the public. It's going to, in the U.S. it'll be $799.
Oh, that's not bad. I've read somewhere it was going to be $1,300. I went, oh, that's expensive for that. So $799. That's, you know, I had that lens as a Nikon lens. I loved that lens. I'm sure the optics are the same. It was amazing. It is so crisp, so sharp, beautiful micro contrast in terms of, you really see the differences when you're getting shadows. It's a beautiful lens. And I said I had the 24 to 70
I had one of those for a
version.
Canon mount once upon a time. And I liked the lens as well. Now, I was using it actually on APS-C at the time. I think that's back in the T1i days. And so that focal length is not necessarily fantastic on the wide end on APS-C with the crop factor. But internal conversations that I've had with Tamron people, they say the optics on the lens they're pretty fantastic. So it might be a nice alternative to those that are looking for a general purpose zoom that don't want to spend, you know, Sony G Master kind of money, but still get a constant aperture zoom with assuming very good optical quality, weather sealing, you know.
Yeah, it's got the vibration control. I think it also has the vibration control, if I'm not wrong.
I can't remember offhand.
It did on the Nikon version, so I imagine they probably still kept that in.
Of course, it's less relevant, particularly when you're going to Sony full frame, where a large majority of the bodies do have, you know, in-body and image stabilization. That becomes less of a factor to me on Sony.
Yeah, one reason you were talking earlier, one reason I didn't want to go Sony was because none of the Pro cameras had dual card slots until recently.
Right.
And that makes a huge difference.
Yes. Yeah, even the A7 III, of course, has basically the same configuration that the A7R Mark III does. So it's two SD slots. One of them is USH2 compatible and the other is UHS1. But, for me, what I'll do with that kind of configuration is I set up with dual cards to where I write the RAW files to the faster slot, and then the JPEG file to the slower slot, and so it doesn't seem to slow me down.
Now, don't you wonder why they did that? Why don't you just everybody's doing that. Put two of the same slots in and make it easy for people. Don't quite get that. Of course,
you've got Canon with the 6D Mark II that's still sticking with one UHS, one compatible slot.
Oh, it only has one? It only has one on the 6D? Oh. Canon. We've done shows on Canon where we just ask them, Canon, why do you do these things? Are you suicidal? Do you not care anymore? You need help. I mean, it's just, they compete against themselves in every which way. I don't think they care about anybody else in the industry except themselves, and then that's their main competition. I don't know. I'm mind boggled that they won't even put 4K in most of the cameras, and when they do it badly. So it's like, it's so easy to just, everybody else has 4K. The phones have 4K, not Canon. So it's sort of always a little bit interesting to see what their marketing strategy is. We haven't figured it out yet. Only that's the reason why
I have Sonys in my kit now. I do still have a Canon 5D Mark IV and then a Canon 80D. But the whole reason I initially bought, and I still own, an A6500 was for filming on 4K primarily.
Interesting. Now, how do you like the 6500 for 4K?
Video quality is fantastic with it, and frankly, because I've been using the A6500 so much, I still primarily use it for my channel as opposed to the A7R Mark III.
Is that the one you're filmed on?
I'm comfortable with the workflow.
Are you filmed on the 6500 when you shoot?
That's what yes.
Oh, you know what?
The vast majority of my episodes, yes.
I was going to comment on you that you always have very good image quality. And I had no idea what you were shooting with. So that's interesting. I was wondering which camera that is. And I thought it might be Canon, but I wasn't sure. Yeah, your colors are good. Everything looks really good. And I gather you don't do a lot in post. You just pretty much shoot and put it out there like most of us, because the colors are very good.
I do custom white balancing, and I try to get things set up properly in camera before I shoot. I was, for a while, I was using, after I got the 5D Mark IV, and I began to transition to 4K on my channel, I was shooting with the 5D Mark IV, but of course the nature of that motion JPEG and having such huge files, it just meant even the whole workflow of editing those, it was extra work, and so then I did do the C-Log upgrade to the 5D Mark IV.
Okay. And
again, if you're willing to invest serious time, you can get awesome footage out of it that is great for grading. But I'm pumping out 2 and sometimes 3 episodes a week. I don't have time to do a lot of grading and post work. I need to just get the content out.
Yep. Now, I need you to do a little bit of ministry work with my good friend Jeff, because he's been dying to buy a new camera and he needs help. He does need help. Jeff?
Well, I think Dustin's he's already mentioned he's going to give me all the help I need. He's going to review the Sony A7 III. I've watched his A7R Mark III review, which was quite interesting, but I've got my eye on the A7 III, so he's definitely going to convince me of that. It's about time I upgrade to get my first full-frame camera. So I've been weighing up all the pros and cons, but like you're seeing everything. There's some things you'll like and some things you'll hate. Well, hate is a strong word. Dislike, but I think the Sony at the moment, to me, is giving me a lot of the things I do want. That's why I was interested in the lenses for the Sony, because that's what I'm going to say. Well, what do I get for my first lens for that as well?
That is a tough question. I'm at somewhat of a disadvantage in talking about the Sony catalog at large, in that I myself am fairly fresh to Sony, and so I've started to do a number of Sony reviews. But the problem is that my first Sony reviews were for the A6500, and so I was shooting I was reviewing APS-C specific lenses, which, now with the A7R Mark III. So what I've done to this point is I did review the 24-105 new f4 G lens, and it's expensive, as Sony lenses tend to be. I mean, out of all the 24-105 alternatives that I've reviewed previously, the Sony is the most expensive. I would say it was also the best in terms of just the complete package of what it had to offer. I was somewhat nonplussed by the 24-105 L Mark II from Canon, in that I didn't see a lot of significant upgrades. Now, I mean, there was a few in terms of the autofocus I felt was a little bit better, but the image quality was only marginally better at best, and so I felt like the Sony offered a little bit more. So, I mean, that's a reasonable lens. I've done a kind of a shootout of 50mm options, kind of inexpensive, relatively inexpensive, I should say. That's the Samyang 50mm f1.4 autofocus lens. And then I did the Sony Zeiss Sonar 55mm f1.8, which is extremely popular. It's very good optically. It's small. It's not cheap, but
a great
it's not
lens,
extraordinarily expensive.
It's a really nice lens. So I have that one, and it's nice. It shoots very clear. We did some video shooting with that too. It was quiet. We did some reviews of how, of focusing and everything, autofocus, and the 55 was really a good performer. And that the what is it, 18-105? Is that what it is? The one you mentioned earlier, the zoom.
That's an APS-C lens, be the 18-2.
Yes, but but Sony can run them on full frame. It's beautiful.
That's correct.
It's amazing. And we have that with the built-in zoom level, and it's a great little lens. I enjoy that. It's one of our favorite zooms right now. Very quiet focus again. We've been doing some video with it, and it's sharp. Have you noticed one big difference? I don't know if it's the Sony sensor or it is the lenses, but we noticed that with the Sony sensor, we did some testing against Canon and Panasonic. The Sony backlit sensors really make a difference when you've got strong light behind you, and you're shooting with just a mild light, if any light at all, and you can still see the person who's silhouetted, but the features are very clear. And we tried that with the Canon and with the Panasonics, and not so clear. In fact, more of a silhouette than anything else. We were really impressed with that. And with these particular lenses, the Sonys just seem to eat light more, and the sensor just seemed to do more with it. We were shocked by that. It really did actually surprise us.
Sony's sensors for a while have been very good with dynamic range, which would certainly be a factor of what you're looking at there.
Yeah.
And I think it was the D, either 800 or 810, that I think probably both of those actually used a Sony sourced sensor, and that was kind of the breakthrough for Nikon in terms of dynamic range. Yep. And then Canon really made great strides, first with the 80D on APS-C and then on the 5D Mark IV, but it's still trailing a stop or so behind where the Sony sensors are at this point. So they've done a great job with that, no doubt about it.
Now the Canon 5D Mark IV, I've seen your reviews on it, I've seen other reviews, and it really is a great camera. They've done a good job as a camera. The only thing they really blew was not putting in a good codec, which they can because they've had better codecs on some of the other cameras. And it's like they missed a huge opportunity to take over that mid-range market of really kind of high mid-range, and they just blew it. I had one on order and I turned it down. I said, you know what? No, we shoot more video than we do photos, and I said no. Can't do that. I already had the Canon XC10, which is okay, but they're really huge files, and our machines are fast, but you're spending a lot of time dealing with huge files, and and it's just, I don't get it. I just don't get what they were thinking, because they could have taken over that market. I think they would have beaten Sony at it, and they didn't.
No, I agree. And the 5D Mark IV really got widely panned by early reviewers. And this is what happens, though, a lot of times with Canon products. Like Sony early reviews are almost always glowing,
right?
Because they're tech rich. Now, I do believe that just with this last generation, starting with the A9, I think Sony is living up to the hype more. But Sony, as far as spec list goes, they spec list fantastic, and Canons often don't. But what I find is that Canon tends to deliver a fully realized product that works, whereas, you know, that hasn't always been the case in the past with some of Sony's innovations. But I do think that the fact that Sony had the ideas, now they're starting to materialize, and it's paying dividends for them. But I think I was almost controversial when I did my series of reviews around the 5D Mark IV, because I didn't hate it, and I didn't pretend that I hated it.
Yeah.
And people at that point, a lot of people were critical and called me like I was shilling for Canon, basically.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? Just wait. Give it 6 months when people have actually used the camera, and we'll see who's right at that point. And, you know, now you hear the 5D Mark IV referred to always as in a positive light, outside, of course, as you've mentioned. I mean, there's no spinning what they did with the 4K implementation.
No, and by the way, it takes very good 1080p.
Yes.
And frankly, I think 4K is a little overrated. 4K is good. It's nice to edit with it. But frankly, there's no real need for 4K out there, especially if you're doing portraits, or I'm sorry, not portraits, but videos that go up on YouTube. There's not a lot of 4K videos on YouTube. Most people don't want to deal with it, and they're big bandwidth. It's going to take a lot longer. So there's a lot of, I just want it. I want 4K because it's 4K. And I like editing in 4K, but it doesn't make that big a difference if I have a 1080p movie that's just as good. We get more compliments on one show we did and a different show we do in a restaurant with a guy we know, and that was shot. He was shot with the 5 DSR. And most people say, God, that was the best video you guys ever shot. The quality of it. They love the 5DSR in 1080p. It looked great. I mean, the details looked fabulous. And we were shocked. We went, this really looks good. and surprisingly enough, everybody talks about autofocus. The autofocus was fine on it. We didn't have to do a lot. We weren't tracking anybody who was sitting down in an interview, but he looked great. It had no problem. So, and it's a sort of engine. Canon, I still think Canon has great products. It's just that they don't do it right a lot, and it's sort of interesting. If you had to predict a trend of what's going on in the camera world for the future, and I want to add one more thing to that, camcorders. Where do you think the industry is going?
Well, I mean, the thing is with mirrorless, and you know, maybe Sony has gotten the magic formula here now that will cause others to innovate and jump on board. But I hear, a lot of people saying, mirrorless is the way of the future, and that DSLRs are dead, dinosaurs, all that stuff. I'm a little skeptical on that. I mean, I think that I commented when I reviewed the A7R Mark III that it was the first mirrorless camera that I had personally used that I felt was capable of being a DSLR replacement. That being said, about 3 weeks ago, I shot a wedding, and it was the first time that I shot a hybrid system of, I shot a 5D Mark IV and the A7R Mark III as the two primary bodies. And frankly, in that setting, particularly for the actual event work, I still preferred using the 5D Mark IV. Now, when it came to posing pictures and where I could use IF and take advantage of the great resolution on the Sony sensor, there were moments where I liked it for that. But I found like it's some of the small things, like in the venue that I was in, they had whatever the light source was, it kind of acted almost like sodium lights, where there was a cycle and so color temperature is cycling, and the actual even luminosity was not even coming off of it, when you're putting a camera sensor to it. And so Canon's anti-flicker technology worked essentially flawless in that kind of setting. The A7R Mark III's was noticeably inferior in that kind of operation. And so there are still some areas where I don't think that DSLRs are anywhere close to being dead. And, part of the thing, like the A9, obviously, and you're familiar now with the A9, mirrorless there enabled a burst rate that's, exceptional. Mm-hmm. But my question is that how many people actually need 20 frames per second?
Not many.
And what are they shooting where they need 20 frames per second?
Running chickens.
I mean, so there are a very few people where that's useful. Yeah. But, unless you're an actual professional or, I guess even an amateur sports shooter, or maybe you're shooting, birds in flight where you want 20 frames in a second where the wings are moving, a millimeter at a time, then sure. But for most people, I mean, I think that we've reached a sweet spot with the A7R Mark III and the even the A7 III, where 10 frames per second, I've not yet seen a situation where I personally felt like I needed more than that.
No, you're right. And in fact, with 10 frames a second at 1,000, 1/1000th of a shutter speed, you can take pretty much anything almost. And,
right.
And you'll get great resolution. We were doing that with the 7D Mark II, which I still think is one of the best cameras we ever had. And we eventually got rid of it, but it was a fun camera, and it shot beautifully. We did some, like, for example, some martial arts scenes where you had to do some fast movements with the hand. It captured it didn't lose one picture. It was rather amazing how well it got focus on. And, it's sort of weird. Ever since people started talking about focus isn't as good as it used to be. In the old days, we didn't seem to worry too much about focus. Now it's like everything. But again, how often are you tracking something? Not always. Yeah. And we have GH5s and GH4, and we've been through the Panasonic focus issues, so we know what they're like. And I still kind of shake my head going, okay, Canon loses it because whatever their marketing department is a little bit retarded. Panasonic loses it because they can't figure out focus is kind of important. You just go, I don't get it. And that's one reason we went to Sony also is, my gosh, the focus on the A9, the A7R III is amazing in video. It's just, you don't have to think about it much. It just focuses. We did a whole series of focus tests, and Sony came out first. Panasonic kind of came out better than Canon, which actually surprised us a bit. And Canon, this is in a camcorder setting, actually. The Canon camcorder wasn't as good as the Panasonic or the Sony camcorder. Both that surprised us on both counts. Because Canon usually makes really good camcorders, but you had to get a lot closer to be autofocused correctly on the Canon, like maybe 10 to 12 feet, versus we could easily get 20 to 30 feet on the other ones.
Okay.
And that made a difference to what we were doing.
Right.
And we were shocked that it only did 10 feet, because we've shot with other Canon camcorders throughout the years since literally 2001, and they had no problem with 20, 30 feet. So something's changing. I don't know what everybody's doing, but not like it used to be. It's getting a little more complex, or they're trying to get too complex on focus and thinking too much of what people are doing.
Canon's DPAF is exceptional, and so if you're using a camera, with DPAF, as far as face tracking, I mean, I do think that the new Sonys are close, but as far as cameras with DPAF, they're as good as what I've seen for face tracking and video work. Yeah. I think the one thing maybe with focus in general is that as resolution goes up, not just in stills but also in video, that focus misses become more obvious than what they used to be.
Yep, that could be. And the sensors are so good nowadays that it's if there's something that is going wrong with the lens and focus, the sensor will pick up on it, like you said, and everybody goes, "Oh, look, bad autofocus," and it gets ugly.
Yeah.
Jeff, do you have any last questions?
Well, no, I'm still pondering all these different things with different frame rates and different whether I get the R3 or whether I get the Sony just the Sony 3. It's just all still a bit of a blur for me. But I tell you what, now, Dustin, you've got an extra subscriber now, because I only recently caught up onto your channel. So, and the funny thing was, I was looking. I saw you did the A7 R3, and I was looking for the A3, and I thought, oh, you haven't done one yet on that, so I'm really looking forward to seeing that. And one of the things I'm looking at for the Sony as well is I'm also looking at, I don't know if you've seen, is the DJI Ronin S for the stabilizer for the video for a lot of the things, but I've seemed to have geared that a bit more towards works with the Sony better, and it's got a big focus puller. And I see from your videos you're a big fan of manual focus, and I was looking at some of your videos and I was thinking the same similar sort of thing, that some of these great photos that you take, if you do them manually, I sometimes get that impression that I've done a better job. If I get a great picture and it's really in focus and nice, I think, well, half the time it's the camera, but I get a bit better thrill when I take a great picture when I know I've focused it and I've done it all myself. So I just want to know, what's your opinion on the autofocus rather as opposed to doing manual focus?
I actually wrote an article for Digital Photography School, which I think is maybe out of Australia, and the name of the article was Why Every Photographer Should Use a Manual Focus Lens. And the point I was making in that, one of the primary points was, number one, as a teacher, that cameras are so smart at this point that a lot of people, they never really learn photography because they trust the camera to do everything for them. But that puts them at a disadvantage in really getting, the kind of results you can only get where, as you've said, you've managed the creative process to some degree. And I often use the term organic when it comes to using manual focus. And that particularly if you're using a camera where you can see the depth of field really change as you focus the lens, you actually feel a part of the scene. Your brain is thinking about what's in focus, and you're seeing the focus possibilities as they kind of pass by in the viewfinder. And as you said, there's something that's very, very satisfying about nailing those kinds of shots. And I find that when obviously, a lot of the times I'm using gear that's not mine. I'm always reviewing things, and so I've got something that I need to be taking photos with. But a lot of times when I am just kind of going out and I'm going to shoot for the fun of it, I find that I often reach for manual focus lenses for that reason. And, like I spent a pretty decent chunk of money on the Zeiss Milvus 135 millimeter f2, manual focus only, but I mean, it is such a supremely beautiful lens optically, and it's a joy to manually focus. And so the images I get with that lens, they're special. Yeah. And so it's not convenient in some situations, but as far as gratifying, I think that maybe this might be a little bit what you're alluding to. It's also the nature of the challenge sometimes, that I don't want a camera to do everything for me. I want to feel like I've created something, as opposed to just pushed a shutter and happen to be pointing in the right direction.
Yep. Yeah, that's true. You know what? I just realized we had some pictures that you had sent us. Did you want to go over those real quick? Have Harold will put one up now. Maybe you can talk about. I think they were.
So what you're seeing here is something that is, to my knowledge, an industry first that I haven't heard a lot of people talking about. If you're shooting Canons, and that is that Canon, as we've already kind of talked about, how that Canon tends to be very protectionist, even within their own product lines. But one thing that they've done is they've always protected native Canon lenses to where, unlike Sony, and that's one of the things I liked about Sony when I went to it, was that they enable lens profile corrections of third-party lenses. Canon has never done that until this new Sigma 14 to 24 millimeter f2.8, and it is the first lens that I have seen that's a third-party lens that has full Canon support, and the only thing that you can see there that's not enabled is the digital lens optimizer. But as far as the vignette correction, distortion, chromatic aberration, and even diffraction, all of those are fully supported in camera, and that's I don't know exactly what the process is. I don't know if Sigma has cracked the code, so to speak. I suspect it has to be something other than that, because I don't think that Canon would just allow that. But obviously, I would suspect maybe more that there has been some kind of agreement that has been reached. And I think, from what I understand, maybe from some internal conversations, that firmware updates to some other Sigma lenses may enable the same of some of their existing lenses. This is a pretty huge thing, because it means that if you are a JPEG shooter, or you're just needing to deliver images to a client, on a shoot where you don't have time to go home and post-process,
Sure.
to have that kind of support is
That's
huge.
nice. Yeah.
And I noted that the correction works extremely well, particularly with the vignette. And so here you have this would be like just a raw file that I've output as a JPEG. And so you can see some barrel distortion, you can see some fairly heavy vignette that's there on it. And so if you'll go to the next one, you can see how much more even the illumination is across that frame. So this is a JPEG straight out of camera that has received those in-camera corrections. And so the distortion has been, it's done a fairly good job with correcting the distortion.
Yeah.
For my taste, I would like a little bit more refined there. But particularly with that vignette, you can see just a noticeable difference, that it's a really clean result in terms of very even illumination across the frame. That's an advantage that used to be only there for Canon lenses. And so, as I said, I haven't heard a lot of people talking about this,
No,
but
I
to me,
hadn't heard
that's
about
a big
that
deal.
either. That's interesting. And you're right, the vignetting was pretty clean.
Yeah.
One thing people criticize Canon a lot for, which at first I didn't really notice because I was too busy in the Canon world, they are very soft. It's a very soft focus. It's a very soft image in a lot of cases. And that used to, I guess, be more artistic, and now it's getting blasted because it's not sharp enough. It's an interesting turn of evolution for them, because people are criticizing them for what they were famous for.
Yeah, and I think that some of that is unjustified, to be honest. I mean, what happens in our very digital world, where people start talking about products a lot of times before they even touch them.
Right.
And so there's this misconception out there when it comes to anti-aliasing filters,
Right.
that where people think, for example, you used a 5DSR, which did not have an anti-aliasing
Right.
filter, and it is an extremely, extremely sharp
Yeah.
camera. I mean, as I said, resolution is fantastic from it. But a lot of people have been very surprised that when I'm doing comparisons where I'm shooting, for example, the Sony A7R Mark III, and putting it next to a Canon 5D Mark IV with the same lens on both of them, that people expect that the Canon 5D Mark IV's image is going to be a lot softer because it does have an anti-aliasing filter. Right. But there's not a big difference. And I think that in some situations I do believe that there's the capability of greater resolution without an anti-aliasing filter, and it does seem that they've done a better job in handling, like and your video guy, so you would understand the whole issues with with moire and that kind of byproduct of having an aliasing filter, or not having one, I should say. Right. But I think that I haven't really seen an issue with that with the Sony bodies that I've been using. Right. They seem to have been able to moderate that downside pretty well. But I think, as I said, I just think that gets overstated a little bit. My opinion is, if you can't get sharp images out of modern DSLRs, the problem's not with the hardware.
That's right. That's right. So true. Well, Dustin, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on and finally getting to meet you, because, like I said, I've been a fan for a while, and now you've got a new fan in Australia, and Jeff's a very good fan, so he'll... Well,
that's good to hear. I'll try to deliver on the A7 III content.
Thank you. I'm sure you will. Hey, by the way, what do you think about the rumor there are big rumors going around all over the place that Canon is coming out with a real full-frame mirrorless camera? That I'm actually looking forward to see what they do, unless they blow it again. But that sounds interesting.
Yes, I think the big thing with the Canon, it's been rumored for a while. Yep. So
so we'll see.
Canon's development process is a little bit more, shall we say, deliberate than Sony's.
Yeah. Now, I have the M5, which is nice. It's a pretty good mirrorless for what it does. It's an APS-C sensor. But it just lacks a little bit more. It just needs a little bit to make it better. but it shoots well. It actually takes good pictures. It's a nice.
It's
little camera.
ergonomically good.
Yeah, yeah, it's good. It's like
And
a
that's
mini
something
80.
that Canon does really well.
Yeah, that's true. You know, have you ever shot with
I
the
think
Canon?
the big thing with the full frame will be what they do with the lens mount. And
yeah.
one thing that Canon shooters are going to want is the ability to use, their EF lenses. And I don't know if they're going to be satisfied with an adapter, particularly if it only works as well as what a lot of the adapters have worked for. And even with Canon's M series bodies, Canon's own EF adapter, I found that it's hit or miss with how well it works, kind of very lens specific, which is much like using adapted lenses on Sony.
Yep.
And I think that what Canon needs to set itself apart is that its catalog of EF lenses, they need to work pretty close to, DSLR native focus, because otherwise I don't know that people are willing to go and buy a whole new set of lenses again. So I think a lot of Canon's success there will hinge on how they handle that mount. And of course, a mirrorless body, it's different flange distance. It's a different mount, but they'll need to kind of build that into the design.
Now, you want to hear something interesting? This kind of goes along with what you're saying. Panasonic, nobody knows about this camera. It's the EVA1. It's their professional cinema camera. It is kind of a quasi-camera / camcorder, probably more of a camcorder. It takes, guess what kind of lenses? It only has a Canon mount on it. Native Canon mount on a Panasonic, and you use either Canon Cinema or regular lenses. Now, that's interesting from Panasonic. I just found that one out this week, and I was going, So they gave life to Canon, at least on that camera. It was interesting.
Yes.
But, they're good lenses. I really haven't had an issue with the lenses. But anyway, well, Dustin, again, a pleasure having you on and getting to meet you. Hope we have you on again another time. And keep doing what you're doing. You do a great job of it.
Well, thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure to be with you both. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And for all those watching, have a good one. Subscribe, give us a thumbs up, down, whatever you feel like. And we will see you next week. Take care, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye, guys.